Hello again, everybody. Today in this video tutorial we're going to be looking at documentation. And documentation actually is really important as a developer, that you document all your projects. Even if it is a small project, it's really important that you document that project. And it's really good to document even your samples as well sometimes, because you can reuse your samples in your sample projects. So let's go ahead and take a look at documentation and what we need to know uh, about documentation. The first thing is your format. You want to make sure that your format is very user-friendly, because it's not only you who has to read this document. A lot of times it's going to be office employees who may work in the accounting department or in the sales department or in a completely different department altogether, or maybe even a completely different building, or halfway around the world. So you want to make sure that it's very user-friendly. Just like a professional writer, you need to make sure that it has a smooth flow. It can't be chaotic. It can't be disorganized. You need to have a well-structured documentation. It's always really good from a writer's perspective, at least, from my experience writing, that you have a good solid outline written before you actually start writing your document. Outlines are really helpful, because it's really easy for you to follow an outline if you do a good outline when you're writing, and it prevents a lot of mistakes, and it just essentially just saves you a lot of time, and it really helps organize your documentation. The next thing is good grammar. I can tell you, as a senior developer, I've read thousands of documents written by hundreds of people, and I can tell you my biggest hang up, or my biggest pet peeve, I guess, is about documents is bad grammar. Essentially, when I'm reading through a document, I'm trying to follow what they're saying. I'm trying to understand their logical concepts, and they just have poor grammar. Honestly, we all went to college. We all graduated, or at least I hope that we've went to college, or at least past high school, and passed a basic English class. That being said, I'm pretty sure that you know how to review what you've written. So you need to actually review what you write to make sure that it actually, is human. And I know some of you may be laughing, but it's a very fair statement, I think, because some of the documents that I've received, I don't even know who or what they wrote it for, but it definitely was not a human English-speaking person, because it definitely was really bad grammar. So make sure that you actually read and check the grammar. I can promise you that Microsoft Word grammar check doesn't always work. Now, I'm not expecting perfect grammar, and I can assure you as well that nobody else is either. We're not grammar Nazis, but when you end sentences terribly, with like question marks and it should have a period, or an exclamation mark, why are you excited? Because I'm not excited. I'm reading a document. And things like that, or just poorly written in general. Um, it's really important that you just really review it and make sure that normal people can understand this. Next thing, coming back to the commenting, commenting is with inside your project essentially, or inside your source code. Um, this is for the developer strictly, so this is a different type of documentation, but nevertheless I still consider it a part of the documentation process. Clear wording. I don't do really well with non-industry abbreviations. Like, everybody knows that INT stands for integer. However, INT may stand for initials. Well, from a developer's perspective, INT means integer. So if you want to say, oh, this is somebody's initials, and you comment in there and put INT, I'm going to think it's an integer value. I'm not going to be thinking initials. So make sure that you use clear wording. Which brings me to my next point. Keep your documents, your commenting, short and concise and sweet and directly to the point. AKA, keep it direct. I don't care that your daughter gets off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You got to pick her up. That's not a comment that you need to put in your code. I don't care. I don't care that your lunch break is at 11 o'clock. I don't need to know that. So when you're writing your comments, make sure that you keep them small and direct. I definitely don't need a paragraph though as well on how this whole process works. I just need you to tell me what your function does, which brings me to my next part. Comment your functions. If you have a function or you have, something that's going on within this sub, you need to tell me what it's doing. I need to know what this function, the whole outcome of it's supposed to be, and on this line of code specifically what we're doing here, and maybe on the next line of code. Explain it to the point to where anybody can read your comment and understand what you're doing. I often like to think of it as, comment it to the point to where it's like a 3-year-old talking to you essentially. They don't have good English or good grammar, but you get the gist of it. They're very direct in their sentences. They're very small, very short, but you get the idea. Like, I want milk. Obviously he's thirsty. He wants milk. So your commenting, should be something along those lines. We're not going for English major, perfect grammar or anything when we're talking inside the actual source code documenting. We're more or less looking for very quick sentences, very short, maybe not even a full sentence, just explaining what you're doing. Next thing is, well, if you have a sub that, or a collection of subs that do something along the same lines, I don't like commenting for subs necessarily in that sense. I don't need you to, to tell me, oh, this whole section is dealing with this mathematical equation or dealing with this SQL database. What you should do is you should create a region. Now, and that region will act as your comment essentially. You can take everything that deals with that table specifically, if we're talking SQL or whatever that function is. You have to have multiple functions that deal with that specific type of thing, whatever it is. Put it all in a region and comment that region. That tells me, I like to do this with my health system essentially, because I like to take anything that's health related for a character. Let's say that I'm building a piece of software, an entertainment piece of software. If it's related to that character's health, I put it all in there inside of region. And another thing, I'll nest my regions, which I know we haven't talked about nesting yet, but it's like putting something inside of something, like the soda inside of your can of pop. The can of pop is the outside, of course, the outer region, and then inside of that cola bottle is your soda itself. It's contained within inside of it. Now, you're going to see that a lot with software as you learn how to develop. You're going to see a lot of nesting. So get used to that idea and that concept of containers. The last thing is procedures. If you have a procedure, you need to comment, your procedure, what each step is doing. Now, even though we're doing object-oriented development where we don't have to necessarily deal with like runtime procedures necessarily like we did in the olden golden days, like in the 80s where everything was step by step, we still have procedures in object-oriented development. It's still there and it'll probably always exist. And there's, procedure could be taken different directions as well as a developer. You could be referring to how a specific procedure for this type of math equation that you have to do because your company says this is the way you have to do it. Or you could be talking about something completely different, an actual procedure. So make sure that you comment though, your procedures essentially. Commenting is really critical because what is going to happen is 6 months from now when you come back to your project and you start having issues when you're in your alpha testing or in your beta testing or even in your live testing, and you didn't document very well, you're going to have to depend on your commenting. Or worst case scenario would say that you're a brand new developer. They hired you on because this project's just getting too big. The guy before you didn't comment his code. You have no idea what's going on. You have to take 10 minutes of his time to go over there to ask him to figure out what this does. 10 minutes may not seem like a whole lot of time to normal people, but to a developer, that's a huge amount of time. Our time is extremely valuable as developers. So 10 minutes is a huge time. And if we have to do that 3 or 4 times a week, I mean, let's go 6 times. If I have to do that 6 times a week, that's exactly 1 hour every week that I'm wasting out of your time or the company's time because I have to go and ask questions because the guy before me did not simply take 2 seconds to make a comment. And now he's wasting, whatever, you're making an hour once a week. So, and, usually $30 to $40 an hour. You do that 52 times, because there's 52 weeks in a year. Um, 52 times 30 to 40, that adds up. That's a couple $1,000s. You do that 10 times, or you do that, for the next 10 years, you're talking a lot of money essentially lost simply because you did not do a very simple, procedure that every developer is supposed to do. So it does add up, and it's very important. And even if you're one of those developers like, oh, I'm working on this alone, it doesn't matter. Still do it because you know what? You're going to retire, or you're going to be fired, or you're going to go to a different job. Something's going to happen where you're not always going to be there, and somebody's going to look at that project and you're like, huh, what's going on here? Well, I can't use this. Well, now we just wasted, 2 months because you didn't comment your code, and I can't use your sample. So it's really critical. There's a million reasons for commenting. So yeah, make sure you comment. Next thing, going back to your documentation, I like to put help menus in all of my pieces of software that I develop, whether it's a big or small project. The only thing I don't put help menus in typically is samples. However, since we're looking at this from the project perspective, you should have a help menu in your project. In the help menu, I know we're not English majors, and I know we're not like, super savvy, sociable people. By default, most developers are not very sociable. I completely get that. I am definitely out of the norm because I'm very sociable, but most developers are not. However, you still have to interact with people in some way, shape, or form as a developer. You either have to train them somehow, or you're going to have to interact somehow. So help menu is a very good way to help your user to avoid tickets, to avoid angry emails, to avoid them approaching you, to avoid them simply just asking you questions on how this project works. So what you want to do is you want to create a help menu that's easy to read. Again, going back to that whole grammar concept, make sure that it's, something that humans can read, the average person can read, which making something that's, the average user can read comes to our next point, which is well written. The average user is not going to know technical terms. Do not put technical terms in your help menu. If you put a technical term in your help menu, you need to explain what that technical term means and how it works, at least on a basic level, so they can understand basically what's going on. They need to understand, as people and as humans, essentially, users are essentially, they need to feel like they understand the software if they're going to use the software. If they don't understand how to use it, they're not going to use it, even if it does save them millions of dollars, because they simply don't understand it. They don't want to use it. They don't want to touch it. So you need to make sure that people understand what this does. Good instructions. It's always good to have like an FAQ. You're always going to have frequently asked questions. And if you can put that in your help menu, it's a big help because you're going to avoid a lot of common emails. You can get 50,000 emails asking you, where's the start button? Like, that's never happened before. Or where's the power button? A lot of common questions about these things, like how do I turn this on? How do I turn it off? What does this? What does that? Write some good basic instructions for, common things that you'll use or that you may run into. Yes, I know this is tedious, and yes, I know it takes time, but this is a part of software development. It's a very critical part because it saves your company a lot of money, and it saves them a lot of time, and more importantly, it saves you a lot of time. The last thing is good visuals. A lot of people are very visual when it comes to learning or when it comes to at least understanding. Give you a prime example of this, not that I'm endorsing this company or anything, but YouTube. YouTube is very popular. I mean, I know they have a lot of silly videos on there, but they also have a lot of how-to videos and a lot of helpful videos, just like this video that I'm sure it's on YouTube, and that's probably where you're watching it. So, good visuals. Now, when I say good visuals, though, in that aspect, I don't mean you have to actually go out and make a video, of everything possible for your software. I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is when you design your GUI or your help menu, essentially, that you have visuals. You can make a schematic, essentially a visual schematic for people pointing out, or a diagram, essentially, of your software. That is always really good to give a nice diagram breakdown of what does what. If you have the space, videos are always really good as well. Never opposed to a video, because videos are, really nice. If you do them really well, they can be very helpful. Other visuals. Microsoft kind of tapped into this very early into the market, and if you're a developer and you haven't caught on to this, I'm kind of surprised, but using icons. Icons are an extremely powerful tool. The funny thing about Microsoft Windows, using them for example, is that I can actually navigate in a Japanese version of Microsoft Windows, and so can just about anybody else in the world. And the reason for that is the icons itself. We all have this engraved in our head that we know what the start menu looks like. We know what the control menu icon looks like. Essentially, we can't read the text, but we know what these icons look like. And we know if we click on them, we know roughly about what they're going to do. So we can navigate somewhat, just by looking at the icons. Your software can have that same appearance. Now, you can either hire professional artists to create icons for your software product, which can be expensive, but in the long run, if it's a product you're going to use for years to come, it can be very beneficial. On the flip side of that, let's say that you are a low budget project and you don't have the money to invest in an artist, to make your icons. Luckily for you, the internet provides a solution as well. There are lots of free generic icons that are professional in appearance that you can go out and you can download. Just make sure that you give proper credit to those people who worked hard on that icon for you, and you can use them for free in your Office solutions or in your software solutions, whatever your solution may be. So, in conclusion, that's pretty much all I have for you guys about documentation and how to professionally present your documentation. In the next tutorials, we will actually start diving into the actual programming process itself and actually start coding software itself. The reason, though, why these first few tutorials do not cover actual software development is because you need to know these basics before you even start programming. And the reason for that is because these are probably the most commonly overlooked things that people don't learn until later on in their professional career, and it really hurts them because they start to develop bad habits right off the bat. A lot of developers commonly nowadays go to college, but the old school developers essentially didn't have the money to go to college. So they picked up bad habits right off the bat, and then they have to break those habits, essentially. I myself, I didn't go to college for programming. I went for networking. So I picked up some bad habits as a developer right off the bat because I didn't know any better. However, I had to learn to break those habits. You are going to be much more beneficial than where I was, because now I'm taking everything that I've learned that was bad and I'm putting it into video tutorials so you don't have to learn bad habits. You can only learn good habits, and you'll learn good practices, and you'll be a much better developer than what I was when I started. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the video tutorials so far. I do apologize that we haven't jumped right into the programming, but I think once you start actually programming and you see how to program, you'll understand why these first few videos have strictly been talking about project planning, and going into the more management style of development first. Alright, so please comment and subscribe if you have any questions or concerns about documentation as well that I didn't cover. Please feel free to post your questions and email your questions, and I will do my best to answer those questions for you. Alright, thank you.